Okay. So welcome to everybody listening right now and everybody who might listen in the future to the second part of the series, What Makes Our Inner Work Work? And I call this chapter or part Niki Lauda Burned and Came Back. A little bit about this in a second. But a few words of warning to begin with. You know, talking about what makes our inner work work and about anything significant actually in life in general and on our spiritual and path and on our way to healing and on everything really is a bit tricky. It's very, very easy to misunderstand. It's very easy to hear only one side of an idea and not hear everything at its wholeness, in its wholeness. And there are lots of subtleties involved, which are really, really important and can make a huge difference on our path. So this is why this is a series and not a one-time thing. I'm making an effort, and hopefully I'll succeed, to give a lot of information from many points of view, and I'll try to put in at least some of the subtleties involved so that the work will actually work for you and for me and for all of us together, because that's what makes the difference. We'll get back to that in a minute. So it's really, really wise, for example, not to take what I say in the beginning of a meeting without hearing it till the end. It's absolutely fine if you don't like it and you just move on, but don't think you got it if you only heard the first part, okay? So, part 2, Niki Lauda burned and came back. Well, more than 30 years ago, when I was still going through my 10-year-long depression or dark night of the soul, I wrote a short story. It was, I think, as far as I can remember, it was a very, very, an extremely depressing story. I don't think I have it anymore. So, which is a pity, but that's another story, why I don't have it anymore. But anyway, within this depressing short story, there was only one line, a very short line, that I remembered for over 30 years. And the line was, you can guess, Niki Lauda burned and came back. Niki Lauda burned and came back. Now, for those of you who don't know who Niki Lauda was, he was a very, very famous Formula One champion and is considered till this day one of the best car racing champions ever. And you know, during my 10-year-long depression, things like cars or car racing were probably much more interesting and impressive to me than they are now, I must admit. But you know, when you have no real nourishment and you're not really alive, and when we feel dead in a way, some of us seek thrills that make us feel a semblance of being alive. It's kind of a replacement. And I guess that was part of my, you know, I wasn't that interested in car racing, but a little bit perhaps. I thought it was very cool, I think. Anyway, Niki Lauda this very, very famous champion, crashed in 1976. It was during a Formula One race, and his car burst into flames. And he was trapped in it, in this burning car, and suffered very, very severe burns. He nearly died. And 6 weeks later, he was already racing again. He was still in bandages, and they even say, didn't hear it myself, but they say that just before he went on this first race after the being burned, he admitted that he was absolutely petrified, understandably so. And he went on to win more championships. So in a way, he really, really did have a very intense, should I say, comeback from the dead, as it were. And by the way, he finally really died almost exactly a year ago. It was May 2019. So whether or not you admire car racing, it was a brave and inspiring thing to do. Just, you know, getting back into a race car 6 weeks after you almost burned alive. Impressive. And it seems that back then, when I was depressed, the story had some, you know, the power of myth for me. And so something about what happened with him, with Niki Lauda, made its way into that short story that I wrote. And I wrote it some years after this happened. He crashed in 76. And I think I wrote the story around 84. But again, the line, this one single line stayed in my mind for decades already. And it popped up into my awareness when I was thinking about this series. And as you can see, during the first and second parts, I'm still talking about very early memories of my inner work and what made it work. So why is this the only sentence that I remember from this story? I think because in a way, the single sentence in the sea of depression that I related in that short story, this single sentence was really the whole point for me. When I wrote this short story, I was in a way dead. And I think in a way I was trying to tell myself that my race was not lost. And if Niki Lauda burned and came back, so could I. But I must say it took a while before I actually listened to what I was trying to say to myself. At least 3 or 4 years later, I finally took my own advice. So this thought that if Niki Lauda could do it, I could do it, was not a conscious thought at that point. And I wasn't making any conscious effort at all at that time to heal or to transform or to get help from somebody. I did nothing at that point. I was just functioning and I was surviving one day after the other. And it seemed to me at that point, as far as I can remember, that it would go on like this forever, this kind of living death. But as I said, something was saying to me something completely different. And this line, Niki Lauda burned and came back, spoke to me of determination. It spoke to me of coming back from the dead. It spoke to me of defying the odds, of rising from the ashes, even of winning, perhaps even of kind of being a champion. And as I said, it took at least 3 more years for me to make my giant come back from my personal spiritual death. But it did happen. So the question is perhaps, what is it that perhaps tries to drive us into regeneration and healing? And is there such a driving force towards healing, towards, we can call it completion, regeneration, transformation? Is there such a force within us that we can trust in? So naturally, I tend to believe there is. That's my experience, both with myself and with many, many other people. But it usually does need our real involvement and work to kick in. Now I'm going to make a slight detour to ask a question that we will talk about later in I think, in future parts of the series. But I feel the need to say something about it right now. So what if we could view ourselves, amongst other things, as something that I could call, experimentally, as personal and collective generators of healing and completion. What if I, Ora, and anybody else, is a kind of generator, again, amongst other things, that can, if it has, you know, the basic conditions, I should say. What if I were something that generates a possible unraveling of a personal, collective, and even a universal knot, entangled knot of strings and things and aches and troubles and perhaps karma and fear and guilt and family issues and things from perhaps other lives and from our childhood and whatnot, and rage and shame and hopelessness and all those things all mixed together into one entangled knot. So what if I were also sort of generator that can unravel the knot, both for myself, but also through unraveling my knot, have some influence on the collective and perhaps even the universal knot. So as I said, this is something we'll get into later in the series, but for now, let's return to what makes our inner work work in a more basic way. And let's acknowledge the fact that we don't have to do any inner work. You know, it's not it's not something that we must do. We are supposed to have free will, and we are free to choose whether we make an effort or not, and how much effort we wish to put in, how much inner work or work in general we want to actually do. But I think that any step we do choose to make along the way is in a way a sort of coming back from the dead. It's a step on a hero's journey, a triumph, a victory, a championship in the deepest sense. Niki Lauda burned and came back. And each step that we do that even in a tiny way is in that direction is a measure of our greatness. And it generates greatness. But of course, most people, most of us, have a problematic relationship with greatness and with their greatness. First of all, of course, it depends on our culture and religion, etc. You know, it sometimes can be considered very bad to think highly of ourselves, not to mention to speak highly of ourselves, of course. It can, you know, be considered not humble enough, and so forth and so on and so forth, egotistical, you know. Also, there are the inner voices, the inner selves that keep us down. For example, two very good examples can be the inner critic and the inner doubter, but there are plenty more. We'll probably meet them again in the series as well. And there are actually a myriad of things that try consciously and unconsciously to keep us from discovering and celebrating and living our greatness. Now, it must be remembered, and it's really, really important to do so, that identifying with our greatness can be very dangerous, both for us and for others. So that's not the idea here. It's not to be overinflated and to think we're the only great person alive and so on and so forth. And it doesn't mean in any way that we should avoid greatness because of the risk of identifying with it. Because if we do avoid our greatness, we are limiting ourselves with our own hands from becoming who we are. Now, acknowledging our greatness is important simply for us to be ourselves, to really come back from the dead, to have a life that feels meaningful, and to be able to do things in the world, which is, you know, this world is a world that is really in need of generation, of regeneration and healing. So if we don't embrace our greatness, we are really powerless. So how do we befriend and embrace our innate greatness without becoming egotistical, which is one of the greatest dangers here? And how do we allow ourselves to become who we really are in a balanced way and in a healing way? It's not just about feeling great. It's about being who we are and can be without losing our soul in the process. And it's also about building ourselves, nourishing ourselves, and acknowledging ourselves. And the big question is how to do it. Of course, first of all, there are the big achievements. One of the biggest victories of my life was, as I kind of mentioned a little bit, was that when I was 23, I managed to pull myself out of that 10-year-long depression by my own hair, so to speak, you know, like this. And in 2 weeks, I moved from being, you know, completely lost to being a very, very happy young woman who still had a lot of work to do, but, you know, I was completely transformed. And I was a young 23 or 24-year-old woman determined to enjoy life and to live it to the full. So this was really a huge thing. And it made me realize how powerful I really was. And it really sustained my journey for many, many years. But this doesn't always happen to every one of us. You know, this kind of thing that is really, you know, your life just is changed by your own hands so quickly. So there are other things that we should also acknowledge and celebrate. Not only these huge things, these huge comebacks from the dead, but also little things or medium things. For example, giving birth, you know, writing a song, just being a really good friend. Things like buying a flat or moving or learning a new language or learning how to be angry when you didn't know how to be angry before, or really anything. It can even be the greatness of doing the dishes every single day for a week, or eating well. Noticing these things and allowing ourselves to celebrate them, both the big, the medium, and the small, it accumulates. And it builds our strength and faith in ourselves and in our path, in our process. And it's very, very easy to just say, so I did the dishes, so what? Or so I gave birth. Everybody gives birth. Okay. No, it's almost, I would say, you know, I'm reluctant to use the word, but I will just because I can't find another one. But it's almost our duty to ourselves to celebrate every little thing like that, especially when we find out how nourishing it is to do so. And of course, we won't always succeed and we'll forget. And, you know, that's very natural and normal. But let's try. So naturally, some things are more important than others, but we're not in a Formula One race course where there's only one big winner and only one way to win. We're all great. We really are, if we allow ourselves to be. So it's really about coming back from feeling dead or small or defeated or powerless or aimless or emasculated or disoriented or confused or anything else that pops up in your minds. So it's about discovering and then putting together, gathering all those small neglected pieces and moments of empowerment and ability and greatness, and acknowledging them and celebrating them. And there are many, many ways of doing that. They really add up. They remind us of our power, and then they make it possible to make more steps along our path. And now we get back to the need to keep our balance, of course. So some of us may go too far in feeling that they are the greatest there ever were, and, you know, the center of the universe, etc. So one of the best ways to manage this danger is to embrace the opposites within us and remember both our smallness and our greatness, both our insignificance and our, you know, being huge to some degree. And some, at some point, it can be very tricky. But the journey of the inner work is tricky. You know, that's it. That's part of what makes it work, managing to remember to, yes, I'm really, really great, but I'm also kind of insignificant at the same time. So that makes the inner work work, both these things. And of course, we need to put enough emphasis on our greatness. Otherwise, you know, it won't be nourishing. So for me, it's something like, if Niki Lauda burned and came back, we can all figure out how to be great without allowing it to overrule us. And then we can discover that we are heroes and kings and goddesses and even immense creators. And yet we also embrace our self-effacing none side, or our nobody important inner self. Okay. And I like to suggest a way to begin. I'll just ask you all to stay with your video off, okay? So let's suggest a way to begin. One such way can be making a list or writing a text that goes something like, it can have a heading like my greatness and other victories, or something of that nature. So start writing about your greatness in detail, even if it's a single act of kindness, even if it's, I did the dishes today. Wow. I know it sounds funny. Whatever it is, just collect all these aspects of you that are great and all these victories, from the smallest to the largest. So you write down things are important achievements and are worthy of being celebrated, but you also choose to see the little things that we mentioned. I read a book, for some people that's a huge achievement, I played with my kid and I wasn't impatient, or I paid the bills on time, whatever it is for you, because it's really not that easy to be a human being. And in a way, almost everything is a victory. Think about it. Almost every single day we live is a kind of victory. So there will be big and small things there in your text or list, and many parts of you will probably scream at you that it's bullshit and not worth mentioning. And many parts may even say that you're a nobody and worth nothing, etc., etc. But this is not a journey of self-aggrandizement. It's a journey of empowerment, so that we can take the next steps for ourselves and for others and for the world. We'll make a tiny little break, and then if anybody wants to talk about anything or ask questions, we can have some time for that. So hang on.